Hey everyone, welcome back to my home studio. So I have completely lost track of what day of the quarantine distraction videos this is. I know that it's been a while. It's been like over a week since I've posted, and I had a lot of people that reached out, sent me comments saying, "Ooh, hope everything's okay." Everything is absolutely fine. It's just a little crazy with the end of the school year right now. Many of you know that I am a high school ceramics teacher, and because we have been doing online learning remotely ever since March 14th, everything is kind of like culminating and rolling around to the culmination right now, and it is a little intense. So I'm spending a lot of time just trying to encourage those students to finish strong and keep on working and trying to get them to just finish out our semester. So that leads me to today. So today's video, it's been a while in coming, so again, sorry about that, but today's video, I am firing my glaze kiln. Now, my kiln, I fired a couple of weeks ago when I did a bisque firing. So if you want to see anything about how I bisque fired, check out that video. This one is more or less about what I do, some tips on what I do when I glaze fire. You'll see some of the glaze examples that I had before I was firing, and I'll show you some of the cool glaze results. Like, look at this one. I'm super excited. It's so cool. This is the citrus juicer, the hand-built citrus juicer that I made a few weeks ago, and I just love the glaze combination. Or when I did my spoon rests a couple of weeks ago, those came out really nicely too. So hopefully you can learn a few things. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about how to fire a non-computerized kiln, because you can see I have the computerized control box on mine. If you have more of a manual kiln that has like a little kiln sitter and uses the junior cones, check out my bisque firing video, because I do kind of explain how you use the junior cones on that. But hopefully you find some of the tips that I have in this a little bit helpful on how I, prepare things, how I load the kiln, that sort of thing. And drop me any comments that you might have below, and like, subscribe, pass this along to anyone else, and I hope you all are staying safe, stay healthy, and keep potting if you can. Okay, so in order to prepare my bisqueware for glazing, one of the first things that I do is I'm going to check the bottom before I glaze to see if I have any burrs. So one of the last things that I do on my pieces, I will sign my name, and then I get little burrs there. Sometimes I clean them off before I bisque fire, and sometimes I wait. So if I do have little burrs on there, the first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to knock those off. I have just an abrasive stone. I'll put links to this sort of thing in the Google Doc, but I'm over my trash can here. And I just run the stone over the bottom and over the part where I had my initials. And then after I do that, I have a bucket of clean water. I'm just going to rinse it in water, dunk it in, and take it out. I could do this over running water at my sink, but because of the quantity of things that I'm doing, I find this a little bit easier. Also, you want to check if you happen to have anything that is a little bit maybe sharp or a burr on your piece any other place. You would also want to take the stone over that. Rinsing a bisque piece is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to get rid of any dust that you might have on it. And number two, it's going to add a wee bit of moisture to the bisque so it's not super dry. I do want it to dry for a bit. I'm probably going to let all of these sit for a minimum of 1 hour, maybe 2, before I start to glaze. But if I started glazing too quickly, I find with some of my glazes that the clay, the bisqueware cannot absorb enough moisture, and my glaze goes on a little thin. So I want it to dry out some before I start to glaze. Okay, So I've just completed the rinsing of my bisqueware. Now, after I rinse it, I will often put wax resist on the bottom because I am dipping. The only point of using wax is to make the wiping or removal of glaze a little bit easier. So if you're brushing, there is no reason to wax the bottom. You can just avoid getting the glaze on the bottom. In the case of dipping though, as I dip, I'm going to go straight down and I'm going to be completely submerging the bottom. I am going to wax it, but I do want my initials to show up with color. So for that, I could either dip my brush and put some of the glaze on it, or I could do an underglaze. So I just keep underglaze in a little squeezy bottle. And let me just make this go down. All right. So I'm going to apply a little bit of underglaze here and make sure it goes into the grooves. Okay. And then I'm going to wipe off the extra. Okay. So now I know my initials, my name, I should say, is going to stand out. And now I'm going to use my wax resist, and people use all sorts of different types of wax resist. Use one that you like the best. This is just one that I use that I think works really well for my purposes. I know a lot of people have strong opinions on different ones, and there's no right or wrong, but mine that I'm using, it's the Laguna Wax Resist. It is water soluble because I like to be able to wash my brushes out with hot water and soap. Now, as I apply my wax, I usually like to come down about, an 1/8 of an inch from the base of the pot. So where I have this little bevel area, I'm going about halfway on that, if you can see exactly where I waxed. So if my bevel is about 1/4 of an inch, I'm just doing about half of that, about 1/8 of an inch. Waxing doesn't have to be done if you're dipping. Again, it just makes it a little bit easier to get the glaze off. And then I will hit it right there in the middle. So I waxed over my name. Okay, now this still needs to dry for like another hour or so because again I just dipped it a couple of minutes ago. By the time I'm ready to dip glaze, that wax will be fully dry. Oh, and as I set this to the side, I'm setting it on its rim. I'm not turning it over and setting it on the bottom because I would be transferring wax to the surface. I don't want to get it all over my table. And I just quickly will do that with all of the other pieces, doing the underglaze and then wax. I am glazing using my Coyote glazes right now. I have them in 3-gallon buckets. I like to dip quite a bit. I also can brush with these, but I do like to dip because I like the evenness that the glaze goes on. Now, whenever you have a bucket, you want to make sure, just like with a jar, that you have it mixed up evenly. Your suspension is even, top to bottom, that it's not thick in any area. Now, if you're going to do a dip where you have the entire piece submerged at one time, you could use tongs. Now, tongs are usually designed to be placed on the side and the interior of the piece. So as I dip that down in there, I give it a good shake. You can see how the wax is allowing the glaze to bead off the bottom. I hold it upside down until it's pretty done with the dripping. Because if I flip it over right now, any of the residual glaze that is still runny would run down to the bottom and pool at the bottom, which is not what I want, because if it pools at the bottom, it'll be heavier and it might potentially run during firing. So this is stopped drying, and then I can take it and set it down. Now, in the case of this teeny little one, you can see that I have to hold that one by the bottom, which will make it just a tad bit more difficult to sit down I'll show you here. Because the reason that you don't want to hold things by the bottom is because when you go to set it down, the tongue is in the way. Now, if you're doing something where you're only going to do a partial dip, say like on this spoon rest, I'm going to dip it about 2/3 in the steel gray Shino, so I can still hold it. I really only use tongs on pieces that I'm planning on fully submerging in the bucket of glaze. When pouring a glaze on the interior of something, what I will typically do is I will take my mixed up glaze, and I'm just working from a 3-gallon bucket, but I will put it in a scooper and I pour the glaze in, and working rather quickly, I take the form and I rotate it as I pour it out, so that rotating gets the entire rim on the inside. Then I hold it upside down for a minute until it stops dripping. I do look to see if I have any splashes that perhaps I need to get off. And then when it seems like it stops dripping, I turn it over. If I see any drips, I get those off right away. I'll do that one more time so you can see that. I will pour it in, rotate it as I pour it out, and you see this time I did inadvertently get a little drip there. When I poured it in, I wasn't real careful, so I'm just going to wipe that off. I don't want to leave it on there and glaze over the outside, because even if it's the same color, if you leave a drip, it will look heavier in that one spot. And again, when it is done dripping, I can turn it over, check to see if I have any other areas where maybe it accumulated a little heavy. Learning this trick of pouring it in and rotating it as you pour out is very beneficial. Also, I want to mention that these glazes are formulated for pouring and dipping. If you're using a brush glaze, you may need to thin it a little bit more. Now for the outside, I am holding it from the inside, plunge it in, hold it for about 2 seconds, and when I take it out, I do kind of shake it off, even though I'm not really showing it there. You want to encourage that glaze to come up and off, and then once it pretty much stops dripping, then I'm going to wipe the bottom off and making sure that I wipe up the bevel. You want to be wary of having too much accumulation at the base of the wall, or that could liquefy during firing. And then my last step is I'm dipping just the rim back in the Shino again, because I want to get a little double layer there. And now I wanted to address brushing glaze, because on my citrus juicer I've decided not to dip. I don't want the glaze to go on too thick, because I really want the texture to remain pretty pronounced on the juicer part up here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about when you brush glazes. The important thing to remember on a brush glaze is you want the glaze to be as even as possible. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to use a very soft, fluffy brush to allow for an even application. So you can see I have a variety of, and these are all bamboo brushes. I like the bamboo brushes because they have such soft, fluffy bristles. You want to have the largest one that seems appropriate for the form that you're doing. So in the case of this, I think I'll use this one, and as I brush, I load up the glaze and then just put it on rather rapidly, or as even as possible. So I'm just putting one coat on the juicer part, but I'm putting 2 coats on the dish part. I want to make sure that I have all of the areas touched. I'm going to hit the edge with a coat. I'm not doing the exterior because I'm going to be using a different color over the exterior. Alright, my steel gray Shino has dried, and now I'm going to do a coat of, this is a Laguna Moroccan Sand Antique Jade, over the top of the steel gray Shino. I did not wax the bottom on this because I figured I would just avoid doing the foot, and I can sponge off if I get it on the bottom. So typically when I brush, I usually brush about 3 coats total. And I'll do one more little coat. And after it's dried, I'm doing one final coat on the outside, one on the inside, and then I'm going to sponge off my foot just to make sure that it's very clean on the bottom and up the sides about 1/8 of an inch or so. Okay, now for a final accent on this one, I'm adding coyote gunmetal just on the interior of this rim. Gunmetal is one that can be finicky. The Archie's Base series, you have to watch to make sure that it's quite compatible with your clay body. Say for instance on my B mix sometimes. If I used it all by itself, it sometimes has a incompatibility with the shrinking, and it might start to shiver off. And shivering, if you're not aware of what that is, that's after it comes out of the kiln, after it's fired. Shivering is when the clay is contracting and the glaze is not, and it pops the glaze off in little cracked areas. So I'm just adding some of this gunmetal, and I am anticipating that it's going to be running when it fires. So about 2 layers of the gunmetal just on the interior of the rim. Notice I'm not getting it on the exterior of the rim. If I got it on the exterior, it would run on the outside, which would be bad. Maybe I'll just do a little dab of it right on the tippy top too. That'll be kind of interesting. There we go. And lastly, I'm just doing a quick dip of another little pot in that antique jade.